Hi, good morning slash afternoon, everyone. My name's Imran Siddiqui, and I'm the Director of Communications for the Representation Project. Thank you so much for joining us today for this very special Google Hangout. Today we're talking with Melissa Wardy, who's the author of a book called Redefining Girly, and we're particularly going to talk about the Mother's Play, in anticipation of Sunday being Mother's Day. We're going to talk about the role that mothers play in this concept of redefining girly. And I say anything more about that, I'd love to give Melissa a chance to introduce herself and maybe tell us what exactly means when we say we're redefining girly.
Hi, thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you Imran for having me. So yeah, Redefining Girly. I wrote the book in honor of my daughter, and just sort of as a roadmap to share with other parents who are going through the same struggles I was raising a young girl in a culture that's very toxic to our daughters. And when I was researching this for the years leading into it, before I started writing, so much of the really wonderful and amazing literature that was already out there and research was all focused on older girls, which I think is critically important. But I wanted something to speak to those families and those parents and educators that work specifically with girls like 10 and under, because I feel very strongly that if we start doing this early in life, it makes how they say bigger kids, bigger problems. It makes the big stuff that we get into when they're tweens and teens a little more easy to handle because they've grown up with a standard or a benchmark that's healthful and respectful to them in their girlhood, as opposed to having to deprogram a lot of these really harmful and toxic messages that they would pick up from culture.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Especially we've been thinking a lot here about, at the Representation Project, we made this represent long discussed the media's influence on girls and hypersexualization, but the fact that you're focusing particularly on really young girls, I think that is a very unique kind of something that, as you mentioned, people don't talk enough about. And it's like in that age group that parents, guardians, mothers would have an especially important role. Before kids are necessarily going off to school and whatnot. But what are, speaking of media, what are those examples of when you say things like sexualization of girls? What are those things you're talking about? What are some examples of the kinds of messages we're up against?
So yeah, so specifically for little girls, we have the whole princess genre that turns girls more into objects as opposed to agents. Although we're seeing obviously an awakening in parents that we're looking at more sort of diverse and empowered princess play. So I feel that that's kind of moving in a healthy direction. But the big concern is obviously clothing that is designed for much older girls, but little girls need to use and play with their bodies differently than, say, a 14 or 15-year-old might. But a lot of these clothing brands take teen fashion and then just micro-size it for these little girls. So, when you're a preschooler and you're trying to develop, these large, the gross motor skills and getting a sense of your body and what it can do, but you're in, a crop top and very tight jeans that doesn't allow your body to move and play. A 4-year-old's not supposed to act like a 15-year-old who may be interested in looking cute for school, and that's a different part of our conversation, but we need to recognize what the role of childhood is in our development. And then, so also with that comes these sexualized toys, specifically the fashion dolls, that teach girls way too young that our focus and our femininity is all about being sexual for a third person or outside observer.
Yeah, and I wanted to look at particularly, you mentioned to me an example right before we got on here, and this is winks. And can you
Oh yeah, that's the image I wanted you to find. Yep.
uh, so this is a kind of a cartoon series or dolls that are intended for, what's the age group that these are intended for?
Um, I don't know actually the what the age range would say on the package, but I know that they're in, the Barbie aisle and the princess aisle at Toys R Us. So you've got girls that are what, 3, 4, 5 and up, looking for toys there. And I know for a fact that there are kindergarten students at my children's elementary school that have that design on their backpack. That exact picture that you showed, that first one, they have, yep, that image is on the backpack going into kindergarten. And so, my issue with that is, so I don't want my kindergarten son seeing those images of girls or women, I'm not really even sure what age they're supposed to be, and thinking that that's appropriate or that that's how he would or should view his female peers. And then obviously the second issue is for the girls who view that, there's, we've got the body image and the thin ideal, we've got the sexualized clothing, and we've got the idea that a girl's only job is to be a beautiful or sexual object. They're not shown doing anything other than posing and being sexy. And a litmus test that I use with my community is if we can take an image, so like let's take the three characters on the bottom row with the image we're looking at right now. So if you can take an image and put it on a billboard advertising a strip club and it doesn't look out of place, we really strongly need to question what messages, specifically what commercial messages are being given to our children.
Yeah, so let's stop looking at that. But one thing though that we might think though, these kinds of images seem, well, two things. One, seem to be everywhere. Like you said, not your kids aren't looking at them; they're on the other kids' book bags and the other kids'
Right.
stuff, or they're on the TV that at the friend's house. How exactly, or what can mothers really do, or any guardians really do about this kind of stuff? Beyond the kind of participate in the boycotting and things like that.
Yeah, I think the boycotting has its place, but and that's really what all 10 chapters of Redefining Girly are dedicated to is, I think that there are enough parents out there that have been, alerted to these issues of gender stereotypes, early sexualization, negative body image, and how those impact the development of girls. And so Redefining Girly is a roadmap that teaches parents, scripts, there's toy examples and creative play ideas. In the back of the book, there's different art project ideas that you can do. And so it's all about really developing a framework within your home. And so, this could be applied to also a soccer coach, or if you're an auntie or an uncle, it's, in your circle of little nieces and nephews, what's going to be your benchmark for how you want these girls to be raised. So if you're a mom or a female, you can do that by role modeling for yourself, the woman that you want her to grow to be. And if you're a dad or an older brother or, a male involved in this little girl's life, the number one thing you can do is by showing other women and girls respect, you teach her how she can grow up and expect to be treated. It gives her the permission to value herself in that way and not have to justify her need for respect. She grows up with this true sense of self that's her birthright, and she has then the right to call people out or call out, corporations when they're not showing her that.
Yeah, and I think that brings up an interesting point, the role aspect, and actually a couple people have brought this up and asked a question about this. When we say the word girly, and two things. What do we really mean by the term girly in terms of like reclaiming it or redefining it? I'm thinking very particularly about, as parents, how do we kind of check the gender um, binary, or the kind of the idea that there are only two ways to be, a girl and a boy.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, maybe reclaim this and kind of empower this. So how do you see that playing out when we say like girly? Can we still use that term but expand it and make it more inclusive?
Definitely. Yeah, those are good questions. So to answer that first one, which I think is a good one, is how do I define girly? I the title of the book, Redefine Girly, is addressing how culture and our cultural gender stereotype, but also the marketplace defines girly, which is extremely narrow and limited, right? They're given princesses, fashion, shopping, makeup, and even then when we get things that would seem great, like maybe a science kit, it's not actual science, it's spa science. And so it's the idea that girls can do anything as long as you remember your gender first. And so Redefine Girly is about really giving girls the space to show us who they want to be in the world. And so not looking at your 2-year-old or 3-year-old and assuming that she's going to like princesses. She very may well like those, or all in, and that's she's just gaga over it, or there might be a small part of what she's interested in, but she's also got 5 or 6 other things that she really likes. And so allowing her that, when my daughter was that age, she was obsessed with dinosaurs, and to the point we had to call her Amelia Dinosaur, like as her name, or she wouldn't respond to us. And so I'm glad that I had that awareness, that I wasn't pushing one thing or one type of what a girl should be on her. I gave her diverse, toys and books and experiences, and I let her show us that. So I think that we can. I don't know. It's going to take a lot of work for us to reclaim the term girly, because I think there's so many people who still think about, our girly or tomboy, and it's one or the other. And I don't think most girls I know are not one or the other. They're a hybrid of both. And so the term that I talk to my community about the most is that there are many ways to be a girl. And that's really what I want people to recognize. And, so as an example, I was a chaperone on the 2nd grade class trip to these giant limestone caves near where we live. And my daughter decided to dress head to toe in this like hot neon pink. And I was like, buddy, what's up with your, and she's like, this is so I don't get lost in the cave, so you can find me. But then she spent her time in the caves looking, I don't know why, but she thought there were going to be giant centipedes in there and bats and monsters. So it's just the idea that, even if you do see a girl head to toe in pink or in a princess dress and crown, don't assume that you know what she's doing. Give her the chance to show you, because she very well may be, avenging the dragon or something that just trashed her village. And so I think that we just need to give girls the space to show us what's going on in their minds, because there's a pretty incredible place, and let them tell their story instead of us giving it to them and then expecting them to fill some type of role that we think they should, be in girlhood.
And so in your book, you have a chapter, or you use the phrase that body image begins in diapers.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering how, and that's a really frightening thing to think about, but related to that, in terms of as mothers or parents, how important is the kind of the way that moms and dads and parents talk about themselves? How important is that, how kids develop body image? I'm thinking, particularly, women of all ages, of all kinds, have to deal with so much pressure already around body image and what they're supposed to look like. But how does that actually influence kids, or how important is that?
I think that's hugely important, and there's so much talk right now about body image in the, on the internet and in blogs and stuff, and I feel in a way it's unfair to say, like, hey moms, it's all on you, you've got to do this perfectly, because that's not fair, because we do know that the media and peers are a huge influence. But I think that, and just I go into this in depth in 2 chapters in Redefining Girly. But what we do at home will be that core that our kids see the world through. Like, that becomes their lens. And so if mom is walking around and she's always talking about what's going in her mouth or how much she has to exercise to burn off those calories, as opposed to talking about, I'm hungry, I'm going to go get something healthy to eat, or, dinner was really good, but I think I want something sweet, but then, like, that's it. Not then apologizing or saying she's being, bad or naughty for eating something like a piece of chocolate. But, so I think we can teach healthy eating and intuitive eating, and talking about, if we're going to exercise, which, is important in motherhood. I think it kind of helps you stay sane. But so, talking about, I'm making, a strong body or strong muscles, or I want to be healthy so I can be your mom forever. And instead of, oh, I've got to lose my baby weight, and, or, oh, being pregnant with you trashed my body and I've got to get my abs back. Like, that's not how we want our daughters to relate to their bodies. And so I think if we work really hard, and this isn't just moms, this is everyone in the little girl's life, and this actually also applies to boys, but if we teach them what they can do with their bodies as opposed to what their bodies look like, I think that's the biggest part of the game. And so, last night we were at an arts fair at my kid's school, and our art teacher was changing the diaper of her, I think she's maybe 4-month-old daughter, and she had these delicious, huge, chubby thighs. And so my daughter and I were, like, squeezing her thighs and squeezing her toes, and we didn't make a comment like, oh, enjoy your fat thighs now, this is the only time it's appropriate, or it's the only time it's okay. We just kept squeezing the baby's, chubby cheeks and thighs and saying she's growing so big and she's growing so strong and we're so proud of her for being a big baby. And it was, I don't know that the 4-month-old understood what we were saying, but for my daughter, it kind of reinforced the message to her that as a child, your body's sole objective is to grow, right? And so that looks and happens differently for every child. And so I think that moms can do that because, there's, it's hard. We've got some unhealthy eating practices and obesity issues going on in childhood. And so if you're naturally skinny, if you're average build, if you're overweight, body image is addressed differently with all those kids. And then as girls get into the puberty age, their body kind of disperses weight differently that may be different from what they had growing, previously, like when they were 8, 9, 10, and all of a sudden their body's changing a bit. So I think really focusing on what your body can do as opposed to what it looks like is the best message that parents and teachers and role models can reinforce to girls. Because they're not going to get that message from the media, right? Like, any image that you and I could have found before this started would have shown us one body type for any female character we would think of.
Exactly, yeah. Even that one we did show, they were all the same.
Yeah.
You said something interesting there. I wanted to. You're talking about the 4-month-old not necessarily understanding the words that were being said. So I'm wondering how much do really young toddlers, babies really absorb? Like, how much and what do we know about what's actually happening to them psychologically? If anything, do we know how it's actually affecting them?
Well, I don't know of any studies that show us when kids start to develop body image, but by 2 years old, they definitely have established their sense of self, right? They understand that they are a person independent of their parents, which is why 2-year-olds are so fun in life. And so, I don't know that a 4-month-old understands positive body image messaging, but it's more for the parents to get in the habit of it, right? So that when she's crawling at 6 months, 7 months, you're encouraging her to be strong and and to use your strong muscles. And then she starts walking, and you talk about using her strong legs or using her, take your time to figure out how you go up a step or how you go backwards down a step. And then she's 2 and 3 years old, and you're encouraging her to climb up that ladder at the playground. She can do it. Use your muscles. You don't need mommy or daddy's help. That sort of thing. And so it's really more conditioning the parents to think that way. I think that I'm comfortable saying that by 3 years old, kids are starting to develop an awareness of their body versus other bodies. And I think that also comes into play with gender permanence, right? They're understanding, am I a girl, am I a boy? And I know it's not always that clear cut because it's more of a spectrum, but for most kids, that's what's going on, right? Because they're understanding the difference between girl parts and boy parts. And so, but I've had a parent email me, this was about a year ago, that her 2-year-old was putting on her nightgown for bed and stepped on the bathroom scale, smoothed her hand kind of down over her chest and her tummy, and announced, "I need to lose weight."
Wow.
And so, the first thing people are going to say is, "Well, she learned that from her mom." Her mom, professed to me in this email, she's like, "I've never done anything like that in my life. Like, my daughter would never have seen me do that. Where does she learn that?" So I don't know, does she learn it from a TV commercial? Was grandma babysitting and maybe, I don't know. But the fact is, anyone who's around small children knows that they learn and absorb things. Like, it's their mission in life. So I think that as soon as we can start modeling and teaching positive body image, the better. Because if we wait until they're 9 or 10 to start addressing this, by that time, I've heard girls that my daughter's 8, and I have heard her girlfriends talk about being too fat and needing to lose weight, or not eating so that they don't get fat, or needing to diet. And they're second graders. They're 7 and 8 years old.
Wow. And I'm interested in so thinking of, as you were talking, I was thinking about, so how much of this becomes specific to the experience of raising girls versus boys, and it seems like there could overlap in some of the issues, in terms of like the messages that boys get from the media. But yeah, so in your mind, what makes the specific problem around girls kind of, or do you agree that it's more kind of extreme than what the messages boys are facing, or more kind of problematic, or do you think that you would say that they're equally difficult?
I would say they're equally difficult. I don't think they're more extreme. I think that the girls' issues get far more attention than the boys' issues do. And I think that we're more aware of how this impacts girls as opposed to our awareness around boys. So I think that for girls, the messages are to be as small as possible and to be as sexy as possible. Whereas for boys, it's to be as large as possible and to be as heroic as possible. And then, in that heroism, oftentimes we get, so much of the violence messaging. So, but for girls, the other issue, we just talked about this, but there's really, we only see one body type, right? So whether you're in Times Square looking at all the billboards, or if you're in the toy store looking at all the doll bodies, or if you're, looking through the cartoons, we don't really see a lot of diversity. I think that for the preschool programming, it's pretty good, right? Like Dora still has her round tummy. Peg plus Cat, she's just like a normal, I don't know, I think she's maybe 5 or 6 or something like that. Sophia the First, I think that we kind of see normal, average kid body there. But then there's this jump that, like, as soon as you leave those preschool years, there are no girlhood years. You don't get the chance to be a 7 or 8-year-old girl. You get immediately bumped into being, and acting and thinking like you're 14 or 15. And a 15-year-old and an 8-year-old don't have a lot in common in the world, right? Their development is just not synchronous. And so I think that's where we see so much of these body image issues come in for young girls, is that they don't look like these media images that they're shown, or these teenagers that they're worshiping, because their body still has baby fat, and it hasn't developed curves yet, or it doesn't really have a lot of muscle tone. And so and they start that dangerous slope of comparing their body to somebody else, as opposed to, this is what my body can do, It's a very smart computer that knows exactly what it's doing if I feed it right. And so that's where, families are so important in teaching girls these messages that, they define health and beauty for themselves, as opposed to getting that message from an outside source that may not have their best interest in mind.
Yeah, and how important are the stereotypes that exist also around motherhood? How influential are those on the ways girls learn to think about themselves? And I'm thinking, actually, I think oftentimes the stereotypes that exist around mothers, the kind of like benevolent sexism that we don't always recognize, but moms being kind of think about like ideas like that moms are just there for you, like to like almost um, they're able to do everything and anything at a given moment.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm wondering, we often kind of think devalue motherhood in popular culture and even in the way we talk about it day to day. And I'm wondering if the stereotypes around how mothers are perceived in the media and in culture impact us learn to think about themselves and themselves as women.
Yeah, I mean, I think it does, because right, like we have you're either a super mom and you do it all and you do it all without complaint and you do it perfectly, and then you've got the martyr mom who gives up herself to be and live and breathe her children, and then you've got career mom who's working all the time and has hired help to help raise the kids because she's focused on or away from home, focused on career. And it's like these stereotypes are just, they're so rigid, and I don't know a lot of moms who are just that one thing and who are just that one thing all through motherhood, right? So like when my kids were little, really little, I stayed home with them, but full time and didn't work at all. But as soon as my son turned 1, I launched my company, Pigtail Pals and Ball Cap Buddies. And then from the ages, they were like preschool age, I was writing my book, and so they knew that I kind of had a life outside of them, where I was still very involved in school and their activities, but there were times where I had to say, I've got to go on this business trip, or you guys have to go with the babysitter because I've got to do a Google Hangout with Imran, and so you guys you need to scram because I need to look professional, and I'm not going to get up and get you juice in the middle of this thing. And the other thing, too, was that helped with my husband and I. It really helped us do 50-50. And so whatever your family makeup is, mom having something in her life other than her children, and whatever it is, even if it's not work, maybe it's volunteer, or maybe it's teaching, yoga or teaching jujitsu, whatever, that she has something other than her children, because we don't stop being a woman or being ourselves because we became a mother. And I think that, I guess what I have felt through my 8 years as a mother is that we kind of assume women become stupid once they become a mother, and I think it's really the opposite. I think that we become extremely intuitive, and our brains, I feel like, sort of operate in this hyper vigilant way that we're able to take in so much information all at one time because we're having to juggle so many things. And I think that ultimately we sell moms short, and so I think that it goes back to women modeling the woman they want their daughters to be, and that gives their daughters permission to not feel bad if they want to pursue a higher degree and hire a babysitter in the evening so they can go to grad school, right? That's not being a neglectful mom. That's being a whole person. And I think that's where we need to get to with all these discussions of motherhood and leaning in and confidence gap and all of that, is that we allow a woman to be a whole person, and that she has the space to identify what that means for her, because it's going to be different for everybody. It's not going to look the same.
And it seems like what you're also saying there is that one way that those of us who aren't parents can contribute or help with this is challenging some of those ways that we talk about moms and motherhood. And obviously, the media can help change the way that it represents moms and motherhood. But I'm also thinking, I'm wondering, we mentioned dads, and I'm thinking about, no matter what your family makeup is, whether you have two moms, two dads, a mom and a dad, or one mom or one dad, how can other people support this idea of redefining girly? Whether that's the dad or your other partner, how can people work together to challenge this if you're not a mother yourself?
Yeah. So, one thing is, I don't like when I was writing my book and I would escape to my parents' house every weekend so I could have peace and quiet, and people would say, "Oh, is your husband babysitting your kids?" And I would say, "No, he's raising the children he helped create." And it was like it was my responsibility to raise them, and then he was just helping out. Like, no, it's not how this works. And another thing is, if you're going, for a girls' night out, or you need a break, like maybe you want to go on a writer's retreat, or you want to take a class that's 4 Saturdays a month, and you learn how to do like the mechanical work for your car. There are times where too often I hear people say, mommy needs a sanity break. And so certainly raising children is demanding, and it can be excruciating, and it's exhausting, but we don't go crazy because of it. And I think that kind of goes into sort of like the old stereotype of hysterical women, right? So I think there's a way that other people who aren't moms can refer to motherhood with respect, and not as opposed to, "Oh, you poor thing, you're going crazy. Let me take your burden for a few hours." And it's more about just kind of understanding how difficult it is, and saying, I'm sure you would love some time to, just be by yourself and maybe read a book or write a letter to a friend or something. So let me go take the kids, like we'll go shoot hoops down the block, and you just have some time. And it's like you're an uncle, and you could pick up your niece and say, I'm going to take her to the park, and we're going to just go explore and go on a nature hike, and we'll see you in an hour. And not even tell the mom what she should be doing with her time. Just say, I'm respecting what you do. I'm going to go take little miss, and we're going to go do whatever, and we'll see you in a couple hours. And it just kind of showing her in that way that you get it, and that she needs time to be her own person, and kind of go about it that way.
Yeah, and I think it's so great that the way you phrased it, because I think it's important that though we're talking about how mothers are and can redefine girly, and how big the role is in a girl's life and how important that is. I think it's to say that it's not the ability or they're not the only person, or even doesn't have to be the main person who's doing this. They're one of the people who's helping girls redefine girly, because like you mentioned, it should be not only the job of both parents, but it seems like the community, the larger family structure around them, everyone has a role in this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like this morning I was walking through school, and these two little kindergarten girls I knew, they were carrying these huge stacks of books back to the library, right? And one of these little girls was dressed so adorably, just the cutest little thing. But instead of saying to her, "Oh, Jordan, you look adorable today. I love your outfit," I said, "You're really using strong muscles to carry all those books."
Right.
And it took 10 seconds of my day, right? She's not my child, but she's my friend's daughter. But I took a minute to say to this little girl, and I know she looks up to me, and just compliment her on something she was doing with her body. And at my son's t-ball practice last night, I was cheering for the girls on the field just as often as I was cheering for the boys. And instead of turn into a boy-girl competition, when when my son's little buddy Everly was really ripping into the balls as she was hitting him, it wasn't like, "Hey, yeah, show those boys what you got, you teach them a lesson." It was about her, right? It was about, "Good job, Everly, that was a great hit." And because what she does isn't about how it impacts boys or how it impacts the rest of the world, it's about her. And I think that we do that too often, is take that action away from the girl, instead of just giving her credit and then full stop. And that, I mean, that takes practice, right? We have to kind of condition ourselves out of it, specifically telling little girls they look so cute. It's hard because they're adorable, but we need to be a little more creative and find something else to compliment them on.
Yeah, that kind of, there's a question here that's not exactly the same, but it's kind of similar to what you were just saying. She's asked, so she says, I have 3 children, 2 boys and 1 girl, and one of the biggest irritants I face is people telling my boys they are, quote unquote, going to need to protect their sister from all the boys that are going to be chasing her. And Nancy was asking if we have any advice for her on how to handle that.
That's a great question. So, okay, so I grew up with 2 brothers, but I'm the oldest. And so here's so many problems with that scenario. One, we are assuming that her little girl is going to be heterosexual.
Right.
We don't know that, right? So if there's a child who is, sometimes these kids recognize by 5 or 6 or 7 years old, they don't like boys, they like girls. But they're hearing everybody say, your brother's going to have to protect you from boys, protect you from boys. So one, she's thinking, is there something wrong with me? Because my heart kind of looks towards girls. It doesn't look to boys. The other thing is, why are boys going to be so dangerous? What do I need protecting from, right? It teaches us to look at the male as this potential victimizer, and I think that's hugely unfair to so many boys who aren't going to grow up to be that. So the other thing is that hugely plays into rape culture, right? That girls need to be protected from boys. What needs to happen is that parents of boys need to teach them about consent, about respect towards other people, not just girls, but other people as a whole, and that they don't have the right to take something from or impose themselves on a girl because they like them, right? So like that's what that conversation should be about. But I think what Nancy's asking is how do I respond to people like that? And my response would be, I'm usually a little more smart-assy than most people, but my response would be something like, I think she'll be able to take care of herself just fine, right? And just, that's it, because her brothers aren't always going to be around. This isn't like the 1800s where we needed, an escort into town. So that's, that's not how we roll anymore. So I think saying something just very concisely like that, and then I think that comment is also, in a way, acknowledging the girl's beauty, right? Because that's going to be something the family has to protect. Because it's so. I think that saying something like yes, I'm sure she'll be admired by peers and she'll be taught how to respect and stand up for herself, something like that, and just change the conversation and say, you should ask her about the board she just broke in karate last night. It was awesome. She'll tell you all about it, right? And then hopefully that other person is keen enough to understand, okay, we aren't going to talk about that anymore. I'll ask about karate. And then so whether or not the conversation goes the way you want it, I think if Nancy's doing in that situation for her daughter is saying, we're not going to worry about boyfriends because you're 5, and instead I'm going to talk about how awesome you are and the things you do with your strong body, right? Because that's going to be that little girl's takeaway, because she's probably not interested in boys yet. So, and then I think you can talk to the brothers too and say, how does that make you feel when you hear people say that? Like, do you think your sister needs protecting? Or do all siblings protect each other because we're family, right? And because, we're blood and so we look out for each other? Or do you as a person, not as a boy protecting girls, but as a person, do you look out for all friends, right? And that everybody deserves respect and protection and to be safe and to be not bullied or harassed, and because their sister doesn't have more worth over another girl, right? Like we want to teach respect towards everybody. So I think there's different ways to handle it, and I think that in Redefining Girly, I talk all the time like with these little scripts and stuff that parents can say that I get feedback all the time are helpful, and so that makes me happy. But there's times where, and even I have had this happen too, where people say something and you're so taken aback that you don't know what to say. And so sometimes it's just practicing it. And the thing that I say to my community all the time is once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so it's just kind of like strengthening a muscle that it just sort of takes practice. And you can totally do like when we were younger and people will say something random and you'd be like, do you want fries with that? And so if somebody asks you a question that you're not wanting to answer, I would pull like a political debate move and just give an answer or messaging that you want to direct and totally ignore the question you don't want to answer.
I think humor is often very powerful in terms of challenging people in that way. It also
yeah, absolutely. And you can say what I have found is you can say whatever you want to say as long as you say it with a smile on your face. It's you can say a lot of things that might be standoffish, but you say it with a smile on your face and then kind of look down and pat your child on the head. The person doesn't really know how to take you, so they're like, they're thinking about it in their head, and they're like, oh, hopefully there's some social graces there and some social awareness that they'll redirect what they want to say.
Yeah, that story actually also reminds me of a I think it was last year, there was some viral story that went around. I'm not going to remember it right, but basically it was a boy who pushed a girl down in kindergarten, and the teachers or whatnot told the parent when she went to pick up her kid that that was just the boys being boys. I think that it's so troubling that we teach a grader that a kindergartner that that's the appropriate way to that's just the way you deal with and hang out with girls, and I think it also prevents real friendship from happening between girls and boys,
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's actually going to be the topic of my next book. Teasing little boys and girls about being boyfriend and girlfriend, or we've already arranged the marriage between so and so's son and my daughter. It does impact their ability to be friends because then they're always weird around each other. Here's a perfect example: that picture of Willow Smith and the actor. I don't know how to say his name.
Right.
I can't remember his last name, but and so people are freaking out about it. It's a platonic relationship, right? He's actually best friends with her brother, and he hangs around the family all the time. He looks at her like a little sister, but people immediately jump to the conclusion that it has to be sexual, and then they immediately started questioning her morality and her worth and what parenting she did or didn't receive. And so I wrote a blog post on it. I was pretty annoyed by it. And so I think it just, as you said about teaching boys will be boys. Like, boys don't have the right to impose their desires and wants on a girl's body just because it's a girl's body, right? So, like, we need to teach our daughters that they are in control of their body. And we do this by not excusing poor behavior from boys, right? We can expect more from our boys. Their DNA and their gender do not define their behavior. There are many times I have to ask my son's classmates, his little girlfriends, female friends, not girlfriends, but his female friends, to be like, Benny asked you to take your hands off him. He would like you to stop pulling his arm. You need to listen to what he asks you to do about his body, right? And so it's about teaching our girls that they're in control of their body. And just last weekend, my daughter decided to get her ears pierced, like totally spur of the moment. She's like, "It's go time. We're doing it today." I'm like, "All right, buddy. Like, yeah, we'll do it." And so she got in the chair, and the clerk that was helping us was amazing, and she was totally reinforcing everything. She's like, "This is what I'm going to do." She's like, "Now I'm going to touch your ear. Now I'm going to do this." And she's like, "At any time you can tell me to stop, and I will stop." And I'm just like fanning tears out of my eyes. I'm like, "That's so amazing." And so this moment of getting our ears pierced turned into this really empowering thing where my daughter got to choose to alter her body when she was ready for it. And then during the whole process, she could say stop at any time, and her wish would be respected. And so, it's things like that that just these moments come up all of the time. And once you see it everywhere, and you can't unsee it, and you just start parenting in this way that it just kind of, I think, it starts to feel really natural for people, because what you're doing is recognizing your daughter as a whole person, and you're recognizing her worth and her voice. And if you can establish the fact that your daughter has a birthright to worth and a birthright to use her voice, I think that anything else that comes your way, whether it's the Winx Club girls or media that's so gender stereotyped and stupid for girls, that there's just so much of it out there. I think if you can establish those two things, that kind of becomes her meter, so that when that stuff comes in, she's like, well, that doesn't fit. Like, that doesn't fit what my family's taught me, and it bounces off of her, to the point that you've got these sort of feisty little feminists that just go out and devour the world. And I watch my daughter and her girlfriends do it, and they're hysterical, but they're just so intense, and unless we teach them to question it, they are fearless, and they are intelligent, and they are curious, and they're experimental, and they're too wild many of the times. I mean, of my two children, my daughter is the one who's normally filthy, normally bleeding, and is normally in trouble for doing something that she shouldn't have done. And so I think that if we allow our girls that space to just be a normal kid, they're going to show us some pretty amazing things about themselves.
I think that is awesome. I mean, that you just kind of summed up the whole thing.
See, it was so easy. We solved everything in these 45 minutes.
Yeah, and before we kind of leave, I wanted to give you there are a couple other questions, but I wanted to just hear generally, if you give.
These are good questions. I'm reading them right now.
But if you could give generally just like 3 tips. I know that's an ambitious thing to ask you to do, but what are some top things you would give tips to mothers or any parent to kind of sum up what we've been talking about today?
Yeah, so number 1, I think, is start early. You need to be using media literacy and positive body image, and creating a gender stereotype-free space in your home as early as you can. So if you have a crawler or a toddler, she should have cars and balls and trains and baby dolls in a kitchen set, and chubby, well, they might eat that, maybe not crayons yet. So and so allow her all that stuff, so that there's different types of play, and I talk about that in my book, the merits of the different types of the categories of play, and how every child needs those things. So that would be number 1. I think number 2 is be a guardian of the media that comes into your home, and that you have the right to say no to what doesn't fit your family values. And what might be appropriate for my family may not fit another family. That's okay. I don't think, I'm pretty across the board anti-sexualization. Like, you won't get me to go there or meet halfway on there. But I think, like princess play, it can be gender stereotyped. It can also be really empowering, as long as that's not the only thing that she does all day, right? So diversity in play. And then I think the third thing is, we've talked about this, but model for her the woman you want her to be, right? So whether it's taking her along with you when you take the car in to get fixed, or on a business negotiation, or showing her how to use math in the grocery store, or at baseball practice, taking your mitt and getting out there with all the coaches who are probably dads, and tossing the ball around, and saying, just by your presence on the field, saying, girls play sports, and girls can coach and have the right to be here, right? And so it's things like that. And I think Redefining Girly is an easy read, and it's a quick read, and I did that intentionally because I feel like all the really thick material was already out there, and I wanted parents to have a quick go-to guide where they can pull things, and so I think that it will. I think that the misrep community is obviously very well educated in these issues, but sometimes the practice of them is where we get stuck. And that's where, with the Pigtail Pals and Bobcat Buddies community, we talk about this like on our Facebook page all the time, every day. How do we practice this? What would you do? Or if it's not your family involved, how could you support another family? Things like that. And I think it's just sort of joining those communities, and so that your brain's always thinking in that way. And these questions are so good. I think if it's okay with you, maybe I can answer these like in a blog post, because I don't want to ignore these. These are really good. And so maybe I'll post that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. These are good.
I wanted to briefly really thank you for, excuse me, making the time to talk to me, because I think though we're talking about, we kind of used Mother's Day as a lens through which to talk about this, what we're really talking about is better valuing those people in our lives who provide caring, nurturing, compassion, and understanding just how important those people are to the development of kids, all kids, but particularly, girls who are facing so many pressures and stuff all the time. And I think it's so great that we can take this time to value caretakers and really understand how important they are in our lives. So, yeah, thanks, Melissa. Thank you for writing this book. Thank you for sharing all your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right. Have a great day.
I'm getting excited about the topic. You're barking in the background.
All right. See you later.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.